Think of that question. If the world ends today, will you be remembered? Who's somebody that comes to mind for you that lived their life in a way that it's hard to forget them?
Yeah. So this is part of the evolution of Ali 2.0 to 3.0. Okay. So people who stand out to me are people who have achieved mastery in a certain field, in a certain craft, right? You don't really remember people who are jacks of all trades that are remembered for a long time. So Ali 2.0, that's kind of what I've been doing throughout my 20s, trying different things, trying to become a jack of all trades. And I think now as Ali 3.0 emerges, it's really time to drill down into the specifics of what type of legacy I want to leave and where I want to focus the majority of my time and energy. So you think of people like Jesus Christ, Moses, Muhammad, Buddha. They're remembered for their spirituality and efforts in altruism, right? People like Gandhi, MLK, Mother Teresa, remembered for human and civil rights efforts, right? Mastered certain crafts. People like Albert Einstein or Nikola Tesla, remembered for scientific breakthroughs in engineering and physics. So you have people who are remembered for a long time. They're usually remembered for their efforts for mastery in one, maybe two areas of life. So that's really what stands out to me, is the fact that you have to put in thousands and thousands of hours throughout your life in one or two specific things to be remembered for tens, hundreds, thousands of years, like some of the examples that I gave. How about you? Who stands out for you?
I go to one person on this question, and I've used this in a couple of classes I teach, and I always go to Muhammad Ali. Simply because, one, he's kind of from my era, right? He's from the more modern society. So there's footage of him in film, and you can really feel like you get to know him. But for me, he stands out because he didn't compromise what he believed in. He passed up part of his athletic prime to protest the war in Vietnam because he didn't believe it was righteous. He refused to serve. And at the time, a lot of the country hated him for it. A lot of the people thought he was a betrayer and not American. But he knew what he believed, and he stood up for what he believed, and he was willing to pay whatever price was necessary to be true to his beliefs. And now here, 50 years after that war, you look back at him and people think fondly of him as the greatest boxer of all time and a great humanitarian. And he didn't just stand up against the war. Once he came back and he was allowed to fight and continued to earn his income and his money, he helped people around the world, and he shared his story. He inspired them to stand up for what they believe and that anything's possible. And just all that he overcame to even be who he was. It would be so easy to say, like, well, I made it here by going through the system. Let me just be part of it and not ruffle any feathers. And nobody would have questioned him, right? Like, nobody would have said, hey, you got to stand up. But because he had these core beliefs and he knew his truth and he honored his truth, he's now, to me, one of the greatest people that lived, because he shifted a whole public perception of things. So I like thinking of him, and I like studying him and watching what he did, because he, when he stood up against the war, he had no idea if he'd ever be able to box again. He had no idea if changing his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali would ever allow him success in his life. But he did it, risking it, knowing it was right to him.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And let me ask you this, Jerrod. Would he have been remembered? Do you think he would have been remembered if he was not one of the greatest boxers of all time?
Yeah, I think so, because
Oh,
he was a great person and he stood up. So, like, even if he was an Olympian, right? First off, he represented the country in the Olympics, and then he chose to forego a few years of his athletic prime because he didn't want to serve in the war when he was drafted.
right.
Um, So you were saying if he never had been an Olympian, I don't know, but that
I-
was his platform and that was his vehicle to deliver a message. And I think for me, I have so much respect for him sacrificing what he did because his belief was so strong. And I think that's where a lot of times we struggle today is none of us really have that one firm belief or those beliefs that we're not willing to compromise. In the era of hustle and grind and fake it till you make it and always pursue and material this and material that, a lot of times our ethics, our morals, and what we truly believe in are negotiable depending on how it's going to benefit us. And
Yeah.
when he stood up for being against the war, like he lost lots of money. He lost years off his boxing career. People hated him. Like we got to remember when he did that, he never knew if he'd be liked again. He never knew he'd become what we know him as today, but he knew what he believed and he knew what they were asking him to do went against his beliefs. So
Right.
I respect that bravery there, right? And that courage that it takes to face that.
Definitely. No, Muhammad Ali is one of my all-time greatest heroes. I will say though, is that I think that the main reason he is remembered is because he mastered his craft of boxing. If he would have been just a regular black man a black Muslim man who decided, hey, I'm not doing this and didn't have mastery in a certain craft, I don't think anybody would have remembered him. I'm sure there was a lot of other people in the Nation of Islam during that time that did the same thing, but we're not talking about them. We're talking about Muhammad Ali because he achieved mastery in boxing, went down as one of the greatest boxers of all time. And I believe that him standing up for what he believed in deepened his legacy that only became a memorable legacy because he had mastery in boxing.
Sure, he had a platform.
Right. He had a platform. And I think that people do amazing things that are virtuous and altruistic every day. We don't hear about them. Why? Because national news, that's not their product. Their product is fear. Their product is anxiety. It's not this feel good stuff. So
let's say I would disagree with you there because he had a platform to reach many people. But even if he walks away and stays true to his belief and it only impacts 10 people, that's still a great person, right? That's still somebody that didn't compromise. That's still somebody that impacted others. So I agree with you that, yeah, his platform made him bigger, but just because we don't all have that platform doesn't mean we're not making change to somebody. It doesn't mean that we can't be remembered. And I think, going back to the topic, will you be remembered? That's a key point is you're going to be remembered for, quite honestly, for what you're doing for others. Because let's throw this one out when we stay on this topic. How many world champion Olympic boxers have we had in history? Lots. Yet very few rise to Muhammad Ali's name. Why? Because they didn't give back to others. They were masters of their craft, but they stayed within their craft. We don't know what they stood for outside of their athletics, right? And that's, that could be the same for me. Say in my police career, I had just done my police career, but I never did any of the social stuff I do. Well, I could have been a master police officer, but because I never shared our gifts with others, what would my impact be? Would I be remembered? And I think that's something for us all is it's easy for us to get lured into, well, I don't have a platform or I'm not that big or I'm not an influencer. And I caution all of us to say, hey, what if it's like how many times we talked about the grocery store clerk? What if it's that one time Ali checks in on this lady that keeps her from harming herself tonight or lets her feel like, or him feel like he is actually loved and valued for what he's contributing? Mm-hmm. That's a memory. That's the kind of stuff to me that allows someone to remember Ali for the rest of their life.
Right.
And maybe they do the same behavior.
Yep. So I would still say that it is mastering self-awareness. Not everybody has their core values rooted in them. It takes practice. It takes these self-awareness exercise. It takes life experience for you to realize what is a core value of yours. I'll share a story real quick of how I discovered honesty to be a core value of mine. So in my first serious relationship with a girl who was my high school sweetheart, we broke up in college, and then after college we got back together. We were together, and I was on a trip, and I cheated on her, and I got back from the trip and I felt so bad. I didn't know what to do. It was right when I moved to Colorado. She was coming up, moving from Texas with me, and I felt sick to my stomach. I called a few mentors of mine and people that I looked up to, and I talked to my father, and I was like, Pop, like, I made a horrible mistake. I feel so bad. I don't know whether or not I should tell her or not. And he said, well, you feel bad about it? I was like, yes. He's like, are you never going to do it again? I said, yes, I'm never going to do it again. I said, okay, if you truly feel bad about it and you're never going to do it again, then ask God for forgiveness, never do it again, and don't tell her. Because if you tell her, it's going to break her heart. It's coming from a selfish place. You just want to feel better to get it off your chest. But if you're truly sorry, keep it to yourself, pray for forgiveness, and just do a better job, and don't be doing that shit anymore. And that made sense to me. That made sense to me. But after reflecting on that, I was like, but I can't. I value honesty, especially in any relationship. I want to be open and honest. And I told myself, like, I can't be with someone romantically, in a business partnership, anything, even in our podcast relationship, with not being true with how I'm feeling or what I've done. And I had to be honest. So even though my father had that perspective, I had another mentor give me a perspective like that. I decided, and I remember in that moment, I was like, wow, honesty is a core value to me. So yeah. And I decided to confess and to tell her and let her know what happened. Right. So in that life experience moment, yeah, before that, I had done a lot of core value exercises. I had done, try to find out, but I think like it takes, and I'm not saying that in that moment I achieve mastery, but what I'm saying is it really takes time. Sometimes it does take experiences that hurt. It takes pain. It takes life experience for you to get to a level of achieving mastery in knowing thyself. Right. And that's a continuous process.